is the third circle.
This is more than just watching football. It's a way of life.
In 1999, US talk show host Larry King interviewed Prince. "You're different," King proposed. "Compared to what?" Prince replied. To be more precise, it wasn't Prince that was sitting across from the tie-bound Larry King in CNN's corporate studios. It was the artist formerly known as Prince. The interview was based around Prince's hugely controversial decision to discard the name that he had become world famous with and replace it with a nameless, unpronounceable symbol. Prince had always blurred the boundaries around the concept of his identity. Identity markers such as gender, sexuality, and even race had remained ambiguous. Who really was this unusual, mysterious, almost otherworldly musical genius? As King pointed out, this ambiguity around Prince's identity made him different. But to make such a proposal is to already assume some normal person that Prince was different in comparison to. Hence the artist's response. Different compared to what? And it is this primary question that will frame our investigations here today in the third circle. To what degree do we need to have some fixed, definable, standardized idea of what the normal should look like? Why should normality mean something unchanging? After all, the reality we exist with is anything but static. Humanity itself is in a constant state of flux. Our biology is somewhat different to that of the ape who first wields a bone as a tool in the intro sequence to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. We are always changing. The very cells that our bodies are composed of are breaking down and regenerating. So who are you if much of the very material you are made of is different to what it was only a few years previously? Does there exist something outside of these material transformations? Is there some ideal form, some clear identity that defines you floating abstractly in the ether? And, more importantly, what's all this got to do with football? Well, everything, according to German coaching guru Ralf Rangnick.
What is the job of a football head coach or manager? To have a clear idea of how my team should play. This can be more the Pep Guardiola style, or the Diego Simeone style, or the Hansi Flick style, or the Jürgen Nagelsmann style, or the Jürgen Klopp style. Those are variations, different areas where Pep Guardiola is more the kind of coach who likes technical players, whereas Jürgen Klopp more likes the heavy metal band players, But what they all have in common is that they exactly know how this kind of football they want to play, what it looks like. They have in their brains the video of the perfect game. They have it in their minds and on their minds. And the job of a football manager is to transform this idea of football into the heads, hearts, brains, veins of your players.
Unlike Prince's interpretation of human identity, in Rangnick's vision of football, difference is always defined in relation to what is already predefined as perfect. We find difference in the comparison between some ideal form we create in our minds and the degree to which other forms vary from that identity. But in a postmodern world where the complexities of reality are unfolding at increasingly accelerating rates, is this really the best framework of identity to apply in the domain of contemporary football theory, tactics, and coaching? To help unpack the strange architecture of this question, I'm joined by someone whose identity could hardly be described as anything other than a glistening avatar for all that is ideal. Martin Raffelt, if that is your real name.
Whoa!
We're in the third circle. How does it feel?
It actually is my real name, as my parents decided it to be. I'm shocked. I need to assemble myself here a little bit. Is that something that you say in English? Because first we're starting with a dialogue between a king and the prince, which is.
I'm glad you picked that one. I'm glad you picked it up. Yeah.
And then I'm the avatar for. What did you say? I cannot even rephrase them.
I'll check it again, actually. I have it written down here, Martin. I spent a lot of time on that line. A glistening avatar for all that is ideal. So I hope I've done you justice with that, Martin. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to put this in my Twitter biography.
Yeah, on the CV. This would be good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I've once as you're reassembling yourself after that radical fragmentation, Martin. Let's contextualize this a little bit. Okay, identity. This is a very prominent topic in football these days, and a very current topic. And I'm just going to demonstrate that with 3 very quick quotes. And these are quotes coming from the current head coaches of 3 of the commonly thought of Big Six clubs in England. I mean, we can dispute who is the Big Six, if there is a Big Six. But okay, we got 3 coaches making comments here. The first is Ange Postecoglou. And this was, I think, last season, during his early period at Spurs when they were doing pretty well. They're not doing so well right now. And there was a press conference, and the question was around, is qualification for the Champions League super important? And Postecoglou plays that down. And he says, no, that's not important. He says, right now, the most important thing to us is our identity and our football. There's Postecoglou. The second one is from Ruben Amorim, Manchester United's current head coach. Here's a quote from Amorim. The most important thing for me at this moment is to create the principles, the identity, and the character we had in the past. We will focus a lot on our game model, how to play, how to press, these small things. You can't go 100% on every detail because it will be confusing for the players. But if I have to say one thing, my main goal, my first goal, it is identity. Okay, and the last one here I have is from Mr. Enzo Maresca. This is just from the game actually after Leicester, which is a recent match. They won 1-0. And he was saying in the press conference that the people need to understand that this is our way, our style, and this is the way we're going to play. So again, very forthright in trying to establish that there is a set way that they're going to adhere to and that they're going to play with. And it's very clear across these 3 quotes, and if we think about the Rangnick comments as well in the intro, that this idea of having a clear identity, Martin, seems to be at the forefront of contemporary football coaching and the frameworks that's existing in, right?
I think I will start with a big with a hot take, and I predict that identity as a primary idea of coaching will be mostly vanished in 30 years, maybe in 15 if we hurry up, but I think it won't stay for long. And I'll leave this here as a cliffhanger because I had another thought, and this thought leads to the thought that I originally wanted to propose. So let me start with the other thought. The other thought is a very vague and maybe a little bit far-fetched thought, but
we're in the perfect place for that.
Sorry?
We're in the perfect place for that kind of thought.
Exactly. So we're doing a couple of circles here, but we're going to come back to the middle point. So what I find an interesting aspect of analysis and reflection and like everything you do to grasp reality better and to model reality better in your head, because like this is sort of what we do when we talk, when we communicate, and in order to understand something, if we try to understand something on our own, basically what we try to do is we try to grasp what's actually happening in all its complexity. Then an issue that you face is that the complexity that you're discovering basically is not necessarily easy to handle for a human mind. Human minds are not built to correctly process reality. Human minds are built to survive, and many things we simplify very, very much, right? That's why populism exists. Yeah, so populism is an attempt to break down things in a certain way to people, and that's why when I have to publish when I publish an article in a normal newspaper, they always tell me, like, we have to simplify it a little bit. We cannot, like, it has to be like 1/4 of the length, and you need to explain a couple of things, and maybe can we say this differently?
Yeah, we have to spoon feed these bloody audiences, right?
Yeah, spoon feeding, right? Yeah. And we find that annoying, and we think it's not necessary. But obviously, that's the reality. That, like, the majority of the people, or like sort of all people, will break down reality to whatever they are comfortable to process, basically. And if you are under the impression that you are a little bit on a higher level than somebody else, so you think like, I'm smart, the others are stupid, it's still, even when you're smart, even when you are actually smart, then you're still breaking down reality into basically consumable chunks. You're not one-to-one processing reality.
Yeah, it's what thinking is, right? Thinking is always that simplification, to some degree.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, to some degree, exactly. And that's why I sometimes feel like even this attempt to completely grasp reality and to completely understand things and to be really on point and realistic with analysis is sometimes a little bit like it turns out useless in the end, because sometimes you find the level of complexity behind a certain phenomenon that's simply not, like, you cannot explain it to people. It's just you know already. Okay, this is okay. I now understand it, but it's so complex. Nobody's going to grasp it. So what does it even help you to understand it? And I think identity for a team, and this is where I'm coming back to the original point, is a little bit like breaking down the complexity of football in a digestible chunk of information for a team. So a team can, like, the game is so complex, there are so many greatly different situations that appear, that it helps a team to be able to have a certain focus and to break down the things that are happening in a certain way, and to have like one like, not every, like, we are not trying to, whatever situation appear, we try to figure out what it means for us and what we need to do, but we have some sort of standard mode that we act on. So everything becomes a little bit more simple and clear and easy for everyone, and also the whole team is on the same page optimally. If we talk about Amorim, then also the club is on the same page. So the club is also working in a way to support this sort of simplified way to approach the game.
Yeah, for sure. So there's this idea of simplification is at the heart of this, right? And I suppose what we're talking about when we're talking about the simplification in football terms and in football coaching terms is a simplification of the player's perception during game moments, right? Because, like you say, there are so many things that you could pay attention to. Well, I would say an infinite number of things, actually, you could pay attention to, not only in a game, but in life. Like, I mean, there's a microphone in front of me right now, and, you know, I could probably dedicate my entire life to the investigation of microphones, you know, if I wanted to, because it would be infinitely complex if I entered into that, you know, that realm. I don't know anything about microphones, and I don't really have an interest to do that, but I could do that with anything around me. But that's not really useful, that type of thinking, when you're in the middle of a game, right? And you're looking at a blade of grass and thinking, that's an interesting blade of grass. Maybe I can investigate that. No, you want to be paying attention to the things that are going to help you win the game, because that's the aim. So the idea then is for the coach to apply simplification to narrow that perceptual field into, well, oftentimes a very small range, right? Depending on the game moment, depending on the style of the coach. So, yeah, if you're receiving a ball, then maybe you have given, I don't know, 2 or 3 options of like, here's potential passing lines that you can make, and then you would select from that reduced menu based on some of the things that are happening.
Let me jump in before you continue. I was thinking that when you mentioned the microphone, you were going to the fact that you are also like talking right now, and we are podcasting and talking about topics, and this is also very complex, right? We can talk about various topics in various ways, and we are also doing some sort of simplification by before the episode we are talking a little bit about like what are the things that we want to talk about, right? So we also this is a little bit our identity for today is to speak about identity, right? So this is I always think like communication in every way is a very practical, or maybe like the most practical and most comprehensible field to think about complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose every word is that simplification, and the word has an identity, right? And every word has a meaning. And getting back to this idea of how the coach is using these kinds of simplifications in football terms, in practical coaching terms, it's about, like you said, creating using this idea, creating like a common framework across the team, so that the team is perceiving and seeing the same things in the same moments, and they're interpreting those things in the same moments as well. So like the movement of a defense will not mean something to the striker that means a different thing to the midfielder, right? They think, okay, they're locked in their perceptions to some degree because they've focused on one of the aspects of the environment, they've perceived it, and they've interpreted it together, and they now have a sort of shared meaning of it. And I suppose one of the most common ways this kind of cashes out is in the creation of things we call game models, right? Where a coach will, or club or organization, and I think this is an interesting path to go down. A club or organization will want some kind of general simplification that everyone can work from, right? And the idea there is something like, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We have some kind of cohesiveness through our teams. The players can, develop through the age groups, and then by the time they come to the first team, they know already how the system of play, all this kind of thing. So I think this concept of game model is very prominent, and you see lots of webinars and people selling products also, how to design a game model. And of course, this model, the clue's in the name. It's a model of reality, right? A model is not reality itself. It's a simplification of the reality. You've mentioned that you think this idea of identity, or this, let's say, prevailing concept of identity, we can get into different ones, this prevailing concept of like having a fixed, clear identity, which I think is very strongly linked to the game model. You think this idea is maybe on its way out. Is that something you just see with a concept like a game model?
I would think that a game model fulfills three functions, and one function is like let's say one function is very important, and there's always the need to fulfill this function. The other 2 functions, they are not necessities. And the one function that you need and that the game model fulfills is the need of communication, synchronization. That like if players try together to score a goal, and they try together to defend a goal or to recover a ball, then it makes sense that they have a common idea, right? If you send 15 people to build a house, you don't want everybody to have their own idea of the house. You need to tell them this is what the house should look like, and this is your task there, right? Otherwise, it's becoming a mess. And you can substitute this sort of communication with some easier things. And you obviously the players on the pitch, they can just communicate with themselves verbally and also non-verbally. And like I think a very important skill is that they can read themselves, that they correctly on the fly interpret the interpretation of their teammates. So this has not been done completely through a game model, but it's certainly a function that you need. You need this sort of communication, this sort of synchronizing the players to agree on something.
Yeah, like speaking the same language or something to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are two functions which I think they are convenient, but they are not necessary. One function is what we already discussed: simplification. You're simplifying things to a certain degree, and I think you're probably still going to simplify things, but not always in the same way, because in your process, everybody should become more competent. So it would be logical that when Amorim starts at Manchester United, in the first month, he should use, and he said this a little bit, that he's not going to use every detail, right? That he's going to use a very simplified way of explaining his football, and then later he's using a less simplified way. So you should, optimally, you should all the time adapt this type of game model a little bit to the competence level of everybody around you. And that's why I think that game models will be not so static and not so absolute. And I think the function that will be just straight up killed, maybe I'm a little bit too optimistic about that, because I don't like that function, and I think it's a little bit cowardly to use it, to do it like that. And this function is to have a reference, which is an authority to you, because normally when you're in competition, you're trying to find the right solutions to problems. You find the right answers to questions and you try to find the best answer. And I think this scares many people a little bit, especially when they are responsible, when they are going to be responsible for the result. They don't want to be wrong with their answer. So what they are trying to do is to substitute their own competence, their own competitive competence to find the right answer. They are substituting it with an absolute reference, which gives them the answer. So they don't have to make the decision. Are we going to press high? Are we going to play a back four? Is the fullback going to move up, or is he staying down? They don't have to make these decisions all the time. They have a clear reference, and everybody can look at this reference, and this reference system makes the decisions for you, and this gives you security, because you don't have to make your own decisions, and if you don't make your own decisions, then you can't be wrong about it, right? So this is basically an attempt to install an all-knowing authority over everyone.
Okay, so things popping up for me there is this contrast between, I think what you're describing there, this function that you don't really like, and I would tend to agree with you, is something like centralized control, right? So centralized decision making. Yeah, you talked about the different people with all their differences and variables in certain situations will look to the one already established principle that's operating almost like this godlike entity, and that, you know, gives that kind of top-down framing of what this situation is, this reduction, and within that we can all try and, you know, make our decisions. Of course, an alternative to that, and it's, you know, it's not a strict dichotomy. Clearly, you can have lots of mixtures, but the other end of the spectrum, let's say, would be decentralized decision making, right? So where the actual parts of this, the individual parts of the system, are actually coming up with ways in a collaborative manner of addressing these game theoretic problems that they're encountering, you know, in real time. And I suppose sometimes that way of thinking gets a bit sort of branded as a bit, oh yeah, that's very nice, wouldn't that be nice if we could do that, and a bit sort of wishy-washy, and it's like, oh come on, we're trying to win a game of football here. It's not just like, oh, everybody dance around and be happy, it's like, this is serious business. And I completely sympathize with that, and it's true. Like someone like Amorim, for example, parachuted into a club mid-season in the Premier League, right? It's like, I think the time horizon here, time pressures are certainly something that's important. I think there's a big temptation to use this more centralized top-down decision-making game model style because of the time pressure that's involved, and it's in a lot of situations, and it's seen as, okay, we need results now, or we need like a level of performance now or very quickly, so we're going to go with that. And if you go for this more decentralized idea of decision making, which I think, like instinctively, I think would have a higher ceiling in terms of performance if it can actually be done well, I think there's a skepticism as to trying to, because I think people are very sure about how to implement something like that, even to start with, and then the time pressure that's required for it. I just want to, before I get your thoughts on that, I just want to read this one quote, and this is from the LA Times a few years ago, and this is to do with the Hong Kong protesters, right? If you remember, a few years ago, there was the Hong Kong protests happening. And the headline of this is, "A new kind of Hong Kong activism emerges as protesters mobilize without any leaders," right? So that's the name of the... I also want to say at this point, sometimes I think this decentralized stuff, people say, look, this is competition. Like, there's another one trying to beat us. Like, you have to be very, understanding of this dynamic competitive environment. You could be like a jazz band and have decentralized, but there's not a jazz band trying to beat you at that point, right? So the kind of analogy breaks down. and that's fair. Like, that is fair.
Yeah, that's also what I said, right? The function that must be fulfilled is the communication synchronization stuff.
Yeah.
I think that there must be some sort of being on the same picture, on the same page.
Absolutely. And this is interesting. I'll just read a little bit from this article. So this is the article. Hong Kong's protesters had mobilized on Wednesday as if they'd been trained for years. Anyone who needed a helmet, mask or umbrella would yell to the sky. Those around them would stop, passing the message instantly through the crowds with unified chants and matching hand motions, patting their heads for a helmet, cupping their eyes for goggles, rolling their arms for cling wrap, which they were using to protect exposed skin from tear gas and pepper spray. An outsider might assume that there must be some administrative genius at the core, directing the tens of thousands of protesters who surrounded the legislative building to prevent discussion of an extradition bill that, if approved, would send people to China at its request. So yeah, the article suggesting there that an outsider looking at this level of organization from the protesters would think that there's someone in charge, right? That there's some kind of like unifying authority. But it seems as though emergent communication systems, such as the one on show there, are actually possible, right, among human beings. And given the right time and the right circumstances and the right understanding of the nature of the environment, it is possible to come up with functional solutions in a decentralized manner.
Yeah, I gave a little hint before when I was discussing the communication thing, right? I said, like, this synchronization communication is needed, even though it can be done on the pitch, on the fly, to some degree, right? Reading your teammate correctly and correctly identifying what do they want to do at this moment. This is a very important skill. Actually, I'm not getting tired to highlight this. I actually think that the majority of mistakes in attack are actually communication mistakes. So this is something that I found when I was doing individual analysis with attacking players. And with attacking players, you think like they relatively often have unsuccessful actions, obviously. So you would think like they often just fail doing something. But if you actually talk with them, very often you realize, okay, he assumed that his teammate is going to do X, and then his action would have actually worked. So it's like the mistake is not so much the execution of the action or something, but very often actually the interpretation of the teammate. And this is obviously, but in these details, it's also, this is usually not something that's actually even touched by a game model, right? So there are different category or different fields of this type of communication synchronization that you need.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main problems. I'm just going to read something here from Raymond Verheyen, who's a very prominent coach educator. He tweeted recently, this on February 21st. This is Raymond Verheyen. "A lack of creative players," Verheyen asks, "to develop fewer robots and dropouts and more good decision makers, so-called game models and principles of play should be banned from youth football." Of course, Raymond Verheyen often quite forthright and provocative with his comments, but I suppose that's I guess what he's alluding to there is that the overemphasis on this type of top-down game model is actually for it. He mentioned robots and that's a bit of a meme these days, and killing creative players. But there seems to be a degree of truth to that, even if it is perhaps exaggerated there.
Yeah. I think I will make one longer point in favor of that view, and then I will do another point which leads me back to my initial cliffhanger, which was that game models will vanish or identity as a central topic will vanish a little bit. So I had yesterday actually a session with a coach. I'm doing a little bit like coach consultant work for coaches. So if anybody's interested, send me a mail.
There we get the plug in as well. Lovely.
It was
smooth.
Funnily enough, the guy was actually a Raymond Verheyen disciple.
Okay.
And it's a little
he
bit...
He was or not now anymore? He was past tense. Not anymore.
Maybe after yesterday a little bit less. I don't know. No, Verheyen is doing great work, and I like that he's able to realize that, because this is actually a little bit... It tends to be sort of against his approach a little bit, because he likes to have very, very clear objective reference for everything. He's realizing how that in certain situations this is not quite simple to do, and we broke it down yesterday to to these two sentences, and I think it's very, very interesting sentences. And the first one is basically what Rangnick said. Rangnick was saying, right, the coach, the task of a coach is to have a game model and to make the players play like the game model, roughly. And I said, like, the first sentence that how you can look at your approach as a coach is the players need to apply the game model to succeed. And the alternative sentence is a game model supports the players to play better. So those are greatly different approaches to how you use a game model. And one difference is, for example, that if the player need to apply the game model in every situation gives the player the solution. What we said before, the clear objective reference. So your idea is the game model must be good enough that it always gives the player the correct solution. And then in practice you realize that's not going to work. So because decision making in football is so complex that at the end it comes down to competence. In some situations, at least, you can reduce the number of occurrences where competence is needed, but like the closer you move to the goal, the more it becomes about individual competence of the player. And then basically change your mind as a coach, change your mind from the idea that, like, when I don't coach the player, he has a certain percentage of success, right? So like 30% he's going to make a mistake, 70% he's going to be right with what he's doing. And with the game model, we think like we tell him the 100%. If he follows the game model 100%, he will be 100% right. And in reality, we don't really get there, except when we always give them very like low value solutions. So if it's always a square pass, you can get closer to that, but that's not a great solution anyway. So if you want to actually score a goal, then you're not getting close to 100%. So change your mind from I have to make the player never making a mistake to I want just this rate of success. I want to slightly increase it over time. I don't want to bring it from 70% to 100%. I just want that next week it's 72% and in 3 months it's 80%. And if you change a player from 70% to 80% success rate in the same situation, he's like crazily better. And I think this is a bit especially in youth coaching. I think this is very important to have this thing in mind.
It reminds me, as you're speaking, of a conversation I had with, and again, forgive my pronunciations, Jean Tapia Owens, who's the head coach of the England futsal team, and it was very interesting to speak with Jean because. And it really links to this idea of, we're talking about, the game model has this overriding principles that are trying to simplify solutions for the players, and you think this is going to help them and make them better all the time. But in reality, the complexities of the situation obviously oftentimes get the better of you, and it turns out your simplified solution wasn't actually so good. So then the alternative then we have to think about is like, what if it's not a game model, or we change the structure of a game model away from this top-down centralized, locus of control. And it was interesting, look at the way that it happens often in futsal, is that rather than having these kind of overriding principles, what they have are kind of localized ones. And you have these concepts that are existing between maybe 2 or 3 players. So think very simple things like a pass and move or a wall pass, and then they'll have things like a concept called a curtain, which is kind of like a pick and roll. In basketball would be another example, right? Pick and roll, very prominent move, an effective move in basketball, but it's a localized one, right? It's like when one guy blocks the opponent, and it creates an avenue for the attack to be made because that opponent has been blocked. So these little opportunities for these interactions are happening all the time in football, and if the players have, and it could be, I saw a list, and I think there was 12 of these concepts on, and it wasn't an exhaustive list by any means. You could up these to 25, 30, these localized concepts, and then perhaps the game model can be something that is built from these kind of bottom-up localized interactions, and then a bit like cooking, you put these different ingredients in, and the meal results from that, right? Rather than starting from the idea of the finished meal, you're kind of experimenting with these different ingredients, these smaller aspects. You put them in, you mix them up, and you get something that kind of grows organically, right from the bottom up. Is that something that could be a way out of this problem?
Well, I would argue that it doesn't really you don't get rid of game models if you use that. You just expand your game models to be a little bit better. I think a way to reflect about it would be to think about, I was saying before, we have different fields of communication, right? If the winger wants to play a pass to the striker, this is a different way of synchronization than the team is structured in a certain way or is doing pressing in a certain way or so. So it would make sense to maybe reflect a little bit, like what are the fields of communication that we have on the pitch, and then how are we going to tackle them? One field, for example, is the strategical decision in offense. Are we going to recover the ball, or are we going to just block progression? And in possession, the idea: are we going to just keep the ball, or are we trying to progress? And I think, for example, this is something that I would like my central midfielders to coach this kind of stuff. Central midfielders and center backs, they have a very good position to see all the pitch, and they must feel the game. And then it would make sense to not have this in the game model as a fixed rule, but just as this is the guy who makes the decision, or who helps the guy who's with the ball to make the decision. And this is then another way to this could be also written down in a game model, but it's still using the competence of the players, and it's not a fixed rule that they need to follow.
Yeah, that's okay. That's cool, because you're putting the locus of control. Rather than just breaking it down to smaller and smaller fragments. But still, let's say it's the coach's choice or whatever to pick those fragments. It's putting it really in the hands of the player. We talked a little bit, I think, previous episodes about the playmaker and the kind of responsibilities that goes with that kind of label in terms of controlling tempo and when to go, when not to go. So, and Tony Kroos, I think, was mentioned in one of those conversations about being a good example of that, which I think leads nicely to a comment from a coach who I find endlessly fascinating, and he's still very prominent today, and that's Carlo Ancelotti. And he really sort of defies a lot of the prevailing logics and prevailing thinking.
I used him yesterday in this conversation. This was also my go-to for somebody who is just acting on competence and not on structure, right? He's just so this was my starting point yesterday, that do you use this reference system and make your decisions based on these systematic references that you have, or are you just trying to absorb everything and then make a spontaneous action based on what you have absorbed and what you are able to do with it? And he's I guess very much the second guy. I don't think he has many rules that he's following. He's just he's seeing everything, and then he's just trying to make sense of it.
It would seem to be something like that. And I think often criticism, I think probably less now, but historically has been leveled at Ancelotti. He's not really doing anything. He's just this kind of laissez-faire guy who kind of cruises about the place and might go take them out for dinner, take the players out for dinner, and be a sort of cool guy who's hanging about. And I think that really underplays a lot of the kind of thinking that Ancelotti is doing.
I would say, though, I think the criticism is fair, but at the same point it's overlooking that that there's more to coaching than just applying game model, right? So, for example, I think Ancelotti is surely very, very good in picking the right players for the right positions, and this is something that, like, there are coaches who are very competent with game models, who are very tactically minded and have good tactical solutions, but then they put the wrong player on the wrong position, and everything breaks down.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Gorka Melcher, who I've collaborated with a few times on articles, he put it really nicely. He talks about Ancelotti as being like a gardener, and he understands the sort of nature of these different flowers or plants that he's in, taking care of, and he kind of knows which ones like to be next to each other, and they can interact well and grow and entangle, and at the end, and he's good in doing it in real time as well. So as in a certain moment of a game, thinks, what the team needs is this. The team needs Camavinga in this moment because he's going to bring a certain calmness, a certain elegance, and that's what Ceballos next to him just needs that feeling of having him. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's a very, I would say, undervalued and probably under-investigated aspect of coaching. And what was really interesting I found was
Just a quick thing.
Yeah.
This garden metaphor, I think, is great to make the picture this difference, right? So this game model supports the player to play better, is very much the garden thing where you want the players to grow, and then the other thing would be something like an engineer who knows where it's going, and he's putting everything together so it stands there.
Oh yeah, you mentioned building a house maybe right at the start. So that would be that would be like a very different idea to the gardener, right? I suppose you can get gardeners who have a very top-down idea. If you go to the Chelsea Flower Show, you'll probably see all kinds of gardens, very meticulously ordered ones, and then more wilder, more organic gardens, so you could even get into that. But this is not a gardening podcast, listeners. This is the Third Circle.
Not yet.
Not yet. We don't rule anything out. If there are any gardening enthusiasts who want to explore this connection between football tactics and the natural world, then please get in touch. As we say, anyone, even gardeners, can be a part of the Third Circle. But, okay, let's stick with Ancelotti, because there's a very interesting quote here. And I think he said this in Marca, the Spanish newspaper. So, what have we got here? Headline, Ancelotti admits Real Madrid lack clear identity. And then it says, okay, Sky Sports asked Ancelotti to explain his philosophy as a coach. So this is Ancelotti speaking. I adapt. The fact that my teams don't have a clear identity is a merit, not a fault, he said. If a team doesn't have a clear identity, it's not a limit, it's a quality. So the question then says, so what does he need from his stars like Jude Bellingham, Vinicius, Rodrigo? Ancelotti replies, when they have the ball at their feet, there is nothing I can tell them because they are the best, the Italian tactician replied. Collective mobility is very important. What I want from them is to work and sacrifice when we don't have the ball. Okay, no problem. And he finishes by saying, I adapt to the characteristics of my players. I don't want a team with a clear identity. And this is like heresy, essentially, to say something like this in today's football world. This strikes me as a very opposing view to the one Rangnick is pushing, right?
Yeah.
So Ancelotti is not only saying, I don't have an identity. He's saying it's a benefit that I don't have an identity. That's actually, or a clear identity, sorry, he used. That is actually a plus for us. And I think about Thomas Tuchel's comments when he was Bayern coach last season, I think, and they were facing Real. I think it was last season, I lose track. And he was talking about the difficulty in analysing a team like Real Madrid. And he said, you watch their goals back and you rewind 10 seconds and you don't see where it's coming from. You're like, well, it's very difficult to prepare for an opponent like this because of the level of unpredictability. Bellingham also said something similar in a post-match interview. He said our great strength is our unpredictability. So then this gets me thinking, okay, so maybe it's just this concept of identity being fixed that's the problem. Why not? You can have an identity, but maybe the identity itself is fluid, right? So the actual nature of yourself is fluid, which is why I was interested to start the episode in the intro with a figure like Prince. The other one that sprung to my mind was David Bowie, right? And these artists are famous for especially Bowie, his transformations that they have throughout their careers, like radical transformations. And this idea that you can actually be something that is changing all the time. And that itself can be an identity. And I think that idea holds a lot of possible advantages in a competitive sphere, right? Because if you have the ability to change, to shape shift, to show different sides of yourself in different moments, this can be very confusing for an opponent who's perhaps used to... Hey, just to finish on this, Enzo Maresca, in that interview at the Leicester game, he said how difficult it was because he was expecting Leicester to play, his words, line of four, so the back line. But oh my goodness, they turned up with a line of five, and he was like, oh no, all our training has been is now not useful because the opponent has done something different because they were expecting something the same. So this idea of identity, let's not chuck out identity, but let's charge it differently. Let's give it a different kind of meaning, and perhaps we can introduce this idea of fluidity into the nature of the identities we have as coaches and teams.
Yeah. Before I talk about fluidity, David Bowie made a song about dribblings in combination play.
I don't know it. What is it?
You don't know it? I think you know it.
Oh, I probably know it, but in dribblings and combination plays.
Under pressure.
Say again?
Under pressure.
Oh, of course. Lovely. That was David Bowie. That was with Queen, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
Queen featuring David Bowie.
Okay, so that's a slightly tricky one, but we'll let you off with it, Martin.
Yeah. Okay. A fluid identity. It's one of the this thought is one of the reasons why basically the other podcast that I'm having, and I was thinking I mentioned it a couple of times, but they didn't really explain it. It's called Spielgeist, which is sort of, I would say, the Spielverlagerung philosophy or identity, or for sure it's my personal football identity or philosophy, whatever you want. And the idea with that it is sort of fluid because it's basically based on just appreciating whatever's in the game. So trying to my identity is that I want to grasp and understand and use and optimize everything that the game offers you. And this just leads to some sort of permanent activity and solution making and creativity, but it's not fixed on a certain type of attacking or defending. Just let's figure out what's the best. Basically, is a little bit the conclusion from that, and this is sort of based on that because I feel like what I find really weird is that in every game you have usually strategical development, right? So chess nowadays is played differently than chess 20 years ago, and then it was played differently than 60 years ago.
It's played by machines now, right?
Yeah, the machines are now being better than human beings, but they're more creative than human beings as well.
Yeah, this is where we can get into this. Okay, well, let's hold that one. We'll come back. We'll park that and come back to it, right?
And if you fix your game model, like if you say this is our game model and this is going to stay our game model, you say we are not going to adapt. We're not going to what is you might analyze the game now and think this is the perfect way, but then you don't know what teams are capable of in 10 years from now on. Maybe it doesn't work anymore like that. So one recent example is maybe that Pep Guardiola's game model is a little bit destroyed by man marking nowadays, right? So if he would be just, I will religiously just stick to that, then he's going to run into problems, and he ran into problems. And I think I think Pep is very adaptive. He's going to develop this, and obviously this is something that you can do, that you develop the game model further. But I think it must be important to know that maybe at some point a real big shift is possible, is needed, and obviously this also it hinders the opportunity to explore and to try out new things in order to maybe find something that is better than others are doing. There's also a little bit of an issue that I have with that, but this is more I would think these are more details. I want to hit the point home that I wanted to say at the beginning, why I think that identity won't be that important anymore in the future. and I will come back to Ancelotti at the end. It's that, and this is primarily a point in order like to support the idea of game models and identities, which is that in the last 20 years, the use of clear identities and of game models pushed football further forward a lot. Most great teams, and especially the teams which really changed the game, because Real Madrid was one of the great teams, but it's very difficult to take anything from them. It's just like, yeah, okay, we also have to play very well. It's not very comprehensive what they're doing. While if you look at Pep, if you look at
just tell your players to play like Vinicius, right? It's easy.
Yeah. And if you look at Klopp, if you look at Pep, then it's something that like people can understand that and they can implement it, and also like we saw that those teams were also the best teams in certain circumstances at least. So it's not like this limited approach and like limiting your players and having a clear reference and like doing everything in one certain way. It's some sort of limitation, but it's also helpful in a way. It's also pushing you. It's also like a team which doesn't sit together and figure something out. Like normally a team in just natural communication is not going to come up with a pressing like Klopp is playing it, and they are not going to come up with a super clean positional play how we see it from Guardiola, right? So in this way, the coach goes to a team and shows them a better way of playing that they are not able to do themselves, and I think we needed this phase of the last 20 years to figure, and we're still probably in this phase of figuring out all the elements of football and like how to use these elements, how to coach them, how to implement them, and also like not only for the coaches but particularly for the players. Nowadays, like 20 years ago, players were not comfortable playing pressing. They were not comfortable playing out from the back. Nowadays, most players, they know how to open up from the center backs. They know how to circulate the ball from the left to the right. They know how to press. So the players are better comfortable with all the elements of the game. And this is also thanks to game models, right? But I think in 30 years, we will be so far that players are so well educated in the elements of the game, and coaches are so well educated that they can transport these things much faster. So they don't need 2 years to make a team play positional play, but maybe only 3 months. And then one player can learn everything within like 2 years. So 2 years, like put a player 2 years in an academy, and he knows every possible play style that you could play potentially. And if this is the case, and all the players are comfortable and competent in these different approaches, then you can, I think, circle back and say, like, now we are going to just vary the approaches and mix the approaches and let them spontaneously decide the approaches, how Real Madrid is doing it. And Real Madrid is obviously doing it with really the best players, and it's difficult. For when I said before, like the competent action versus the structural action, the question is if the structural action is better than the competent action. The better your competent action is, the harder it is for the structural action to be better than that, right? So if you have Bellingham and if you have Modric, it's much harder to find a coaching point which makes them better players than when it's some average player, and I think the players are becoming better and better and better, and because of that, identity as a tool to make the players learn a certain way of playing will diminish to some degree.
Yeah, and again, this is a vision of the future that I would be more instinctively drawn to, right? This idea that the general understanding, the interpretation of the game environments, the understanding of the player, the dynamics of the situation, the players are going to get better and better at it, and they've integrated all this knowledge, and they're going to become better at playing football, and they're going to be able to actually do these actions, without this kind of centralized control. A couple of things, and I'll play devil's advocate in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
First thing, It was interesting, yeah. I just popped into my head. It was like when we're talking about, this game models are actually useful. They actually have a lot of advantages. They can actually help. They can actually help creativity to some degree within a framing, right?
I really don't understand the. Did we have this in the last episode? I'm not sure, or did I have it in some? Like, I don't agree at all with this notion that there are no creative players anymore. I really think this is only like this is because the people only memorize the 10 most memorable players from the 90s, and they don't remember every random central midfielder and winger out there. I think like we have such an amazing amount of creative, we have such a great amount of dribblers, for example. Germany alone has Wirtz and Musiala. And a couple of other guys.
I suppose you could throw in an argument and say, these players are here for sure, but are they interacting in the same degrees as they were collectively
That's
in the
true.
past? I think that's maybe something. But on this point of constraints, and it popped into my head because I think it's a nice example here. I'm a big fan of the White Stripes, the music group, right? Jack White and Meg White. And one of the things they did really consciously was constrain themselves. This whole idea of the White Stripes is about constraints. You can see it in the colors they use. They use red, white, and black, right? No more. Only those. They use instruments, what? Drums and guitar when they're playing live. Okay, they have other things that come in and out. But generally speaking, especially when they started, it was guitar, vocal, drum. And they also stuck to a pretty fixed genre in terms of like blues rock, garage rock when they started. But within that very limited constraining framework, they were unbelievably creative. So many interesting songs. And by the way, I often say that Seven Nation Army could well be the greatest guitar riff ever written. I think it's definitely in the conversation. And that's something that's actually you will hear on football terraces all around the world. People will the chant, the melody to that.
Wasn't there a World Cup which was using that as a main theme?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know.
I think like the 2018 World Cup, 2010. I'm not sure.
Yeah, could be. But if there's ever someone, is there a better example for creativity that's forged by strict constraints than Seven Nation Army is the example I would give, right? It's like that is absolute genius, and it's come from very strict constraining.
I got into an idea at that time. I'd been in many bands before that, but an idea about becoming as simplistic as possible as I could, even with the way we presented ourselves, the colors we used, and everything about the band was about simplicity, and that changed how I look at everything. It's like if you tell a filmmaker you can only use 3 minutes of film and you can only use one light bulb, what can you come up with in this room of 4 walls? And I did that with myself, and I still do that to this day. Even if I work with 8 people in a studio and a band I'm playing with now, and I'll still make rules for myself that I don't tell anybody else about, so that I know that I'm constricted and I have to work under these guidelines. I never go into a studio or any scenario and say I can do whatever I want. I have all the time in the world and blah, blah, blah. I try never to do that.
You also mentioned, you talked about, Pep Guardiola and maybe running into a bit of a problem with man marking, right? Because of, let's say, a bit more of the fixedness of this identity of the game style that he's using. I think it's also interesting to note that there is a lot of, as soon as you start saying things like this, people, actually, Guardiola changes a lot and he's very fluid. Luis Enrique has a very fluid playing style now. So this word fluid actually, these systems are fluid, but they're kind of fluid within more of an overriding idea and maybe within one paradigm. But there's definitely fluidity in movement, and perhaps the fluidity we're talking about is a bit more of a larger scale.
Yeah, I actually used the word fluid when I started to analyze football. Like, what year do we have? Like 15 years ago or something like that. I used the word fluidity a lot, partially inspired by Pep's Barcelona, which were a big difference to other, like many teams were very rigid in the 4-4-2. And obviously Barcelona was not. Like, I imagine one situation which was a huge aha moment for me when Iniesta just dropping in on the 6, getting a ball, passing it back, moving back, and I was like, yeah, that makes so much more sense. That's such a better way to play, and because of that, I was using the word fluidity a lot. But in the last 10 years, I'm not using it at all, because instead I'm describing certain movements. I'm describing certain patterns that, like, the 10 can go wide, the 10 can attack, the 10 is dropping to the 6. But now I think we are moving. When I watch Bayern, it becomes very difficult to describe, or Real Madrid as well. Yeah, it's very difficult to describe the movements because there's such a variety of movement, and there's actually a couple of players who practically go everywhere. And then it doesn't make sense anymore to describe the movements, but it makes more sense to go back and say, like, yeah, they are fluid. They are just like looking everywhere on the pitch for opportunities, and that's it.
Yeah, so this concept of fluidity has different meanings, and it's maybe becoming a slightly difficult word to parse sometimes when it's used in analysis. But I mentioned I'll play devil's advocate, and we're drawing to the close of the conversation. But I'd like to go down this path if we can. And I was actually recording this on 13th March. Yesterday, I actually put an article out on my Medium, and it was to do with Pep Guardiola and to do with let's say what we've been talking about there a little bit, the positional game, and we talked about it on other episodes as well. Positional game running into a bit of a problem with the rise of man marking, and that's come from like Guardiola himself, and I think many coaches would just generally say that this is definitely happening, and this is definitely posing some problems for the kind of more orthodox positional games. And so my kind of way of thinking would be, okay, so now players have to move around a lot to try and get rid of their markers and get free. So that means that attacking organizations are going to have to find ways of being organized when the players are moving around a bit more, which is like different from positional play. But I had a conversation with, and the Twitter account is, you might know it, is Mea Armador. So that's on Twitter, is the Roberto Falcao avatar picture. And it was an interesting point that was being made. And it was that actually a potential solution to man marking can actually be automizations, right? Very, very well timed and very and almost accelerated automatisms. And by automatism or automatisms, and what we mean by that are these kind of planned sequences of play where it goes to the, okay, so here's a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to it, is, and this was, someone can fact check this, but this was the proposed to me as being true, so let's see it. Who is the coach, the Gasperini, who has played man marking, is famed for his man marking, who is the coach, of all the coaches he's played more than 5 times, who is the guy he has most trouble with?
Pep?
The answer is Conte. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Yeah, but then, so this hit me, I was like, well, that's interesting, right?
I mean, to be fair, there's a little bit bias because Conte probably also coached the best teams when he was facing him.
True.
On average.
True. So it's definitely worth more research, and I think it's something I'm interested in here, is that this, and Conte, of course, is famous for the automations, right? He's famous for this. This is like his special move. It's like, ball out to the wing back. He's got his systems he uses, or the fullback, inside ball off the the opposite foot fullback into the striker, bounce it back, up, back throughs, all these kinds of things. And the kind of logic to this idea then, so and this is counter to what really I was proposing, which is kind of why I liked it. And I was like, so the logic here is that the man marking is itself a reduction, right, of the player's affordances.
Massive reduction,
because you're a massive reduction, right? So you're basically saying, don't pay attention to anything except the guy, right? So take away the decision making almost completely from the players, and it's like, just follow your guy. Of course, there's some principles and details we can get into, but generally, follow the guy. So then the answer to this could be, okay, well, use that simplification against itself. If that's all they're paying attention to, right, we can actually, if we have such incredible synchronizations and fast understandings of our automations, because they're only following us, that means we move first, right? So they're always reacting to us.
And we know exactly how they're going to react, so we can plan very well.
Exactly. And if you plan very well and execute these things with very good players, then it could be then that we start to see an increase in automations as a solution to man marking, rather than what I was sort of proposing in that article, which I still think is true. I still think we will get, let's say, situations outside of this more planned positional idea. I think that's definitely happening. That's definitely opening up. So I'm happy with that, and to go for things to develop in that sphere. But it's also very interesting to me now then that actually, I think that seems like something that would be very appealing to a lot of coaches. It's like, okay, you got to man mark us. We're just going to optimize our automations, man. We're gonna just like hyper accelerate this thing. And it's like, you're not going to be able to touch us. And then, oh shit, like we're going to hit into dystopia now, because like then it's like, okay, so what last thing on this? So then it's like, okay, well, and I guess in this conversation we've been alluding to the idea that this kind of fixed identity, this kind of fixedness of form probably has more to do with the structured zonal approach to playing football. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but probably that's where I'm coming from a little bit more.
I think they're just correlated, because they like football got more scientific, and it got more scientific in that particular way.
So then it's like, well, okay, if you're going to hyper accelerate these automations, right, then you are actually changing a lot of the identity of the football, because you're actually adding to it a kind of machinic element, right? Mm-hmm. It's becoming hyper automated and hyper machinic. And by the way, and this is the thing, this is always used in a negative register, almost always, right? Don't become like machines, you becoming like robots. That's what Verheyen said. But then at the same time, you could actually take the somewhat radical view that's like, well, that's progress. And like, yeah, there's a machinic aspect to this. And humans linking the human capabilities with the machine. You actually said at some point, I think the machines are more creative in chess, right? This idea that, So if you take this idea of the machinic intelligence, hey, we see it all around us in AI, there's discussions about that in society, as not something inherently negative. But you could actually decide, okay, well, we can fuse it. And then there's this concept of like cyborg football, right? Where you have this like, okay, human linked with machines, like you're wearing glasses, there are people with pacemakers. We are already cyborg to some degree, right? We're fusing with technology as we speak. So this strikes me as like, it's not something I feel particularly comfortable with, but it's very interesting, I think, to perhaps explore this possibility of, and that, by the way, I would class as radical transformation. Like, what is more radically changing than fusing with these kind of machinic technologies? So, yeah, I guess the situation there is then, are we going to watch this space and see Conte is becoming this kind of like, this beacon of progress and radical futurism, where it's like, okay, forget all these guys talking about relationism and the human interaction, all this. Like, to hell with those guys, right? Fuck that. Automize more, right? Accelerate the process. That's how we're going to beat things like man-to-man marking.
Yeah, and this is now a little bit hitting my point home that, like having, or it was also a little bit your idea that a fixed identity is not so, like in the long term on high level, it can be a hindrance, because it's limiting your options to do something like that. I actually like my standard argument against man marking, and this is very much resonating with that, is was always that like I was always say, or like my approach to beat it was that I always said like man marking is very unintuitive, so you also have to beat it unintuitively.
Yeah.
So, but the one thing for example, what players would never do is just move completely out of the middle and then have one guy who's taking the ball and running through the middle. This is completely unintuitive. It sounds completely stupid, but then against strict man marking, in theory, it should work if it's really strict, the man marking, in the moment they give up the man marking. So this makes it a little bit more complicated, that usually a strict man marking on paper is not as strict in practice usually, but still, there are a lot of quite unintuitive ways to beat man marking, and I think you could say a good way to view it is basically to say, okay, they are defending in a very stupid way, so they are not thinking a lot about what they are doing. So we are going to turn this against them.
Exactly.
So we are going to make them do stupid things, because they are not going to adapt enough, basically.
Yeah, and a lot of those methods to do that, I guess, would be planned, right? You plan them, and that's where this idea of these automations come from. And of course, this obviously has heavy implications. You can think about for youth football, and there's already discussions about positional play and the effect that has on youth development. Imagine if you go heavy down the road of this hyper automation, and that becomes successful, which I wouldn't rule it out. Right, the way the football is, the way the world is, and I'm not trying to say too much about that at the moment, but you can imagine that if you start to get coaches who are like, okay, well, the football game at the highest level is like this, then we have to train footballers to win games in football. So we have to hyper-automize them from a very young age. They have to become experts in this mode of football. Again, you start to see a little bit of a dystopian kind of vision coming in. Maybe that's something that people just have to swallow, Martin, right? It's like, this is the brave new world. I don't know.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time. Like tears in rain.
No. I'm going to break this dystopy for you, because there's an like against this there are ways against these automations, which is like mixing things up. You can only automate against a certain thing. If you just then change it, then the automation doesn't work anymore. So in the moment when you are flexible, like when you are, it's very difficult to have an automation against Real Madrid, right? So I think I think where we are heading is that more and more quite different approaches to football are being recognized as viable. So it's not like we have this one, like this is the way to play football, but we have like certain different play styles, and we know they all can be good. You can put very experienced players and play like Real Madrid. You can play a lot of technical players and play like Manchester City, and you can put some very physical players and play like Liverpool or like Atletico, and this is all possible. And then we have a lot of different approaches, and obviously they will match up in a different way. And then it comes a little bit into that regard where I said like that identities won't play such a big role anymore, and what Ancelotti said, that a lack of identity is a strength. That in this case, when you face not the same team over and over again, and this is still sometimes the case, and it was a lot the case in the past, like when you were playing in the Premier League, you are facing a 4-4-2 mid-block all the time. And in Bundesliga as well for a big while. And if it's not the same every game, but it's very differently, then you want to be able to adapt, you want to be able to change things, and in that case, you don't want to have such a fixed identity. You want to have a rather vague identity, like we are able to adapt better. It's also some sort of identity, right? But it's not a fixed game or a fixed playing style. It's just like we can mix up the game in certain ways. And one point that I still wanted to make is that right now, when you have a very detailed game model and you are really good in getting your team to playing that game model, one issue that you face is that if you run into a situation where your game model is not quite appropriate for your opponent, you think we should mix it up, but then you lose all the things that you trained. You're suddenly a completely fresh team which has no experience in their new playing style. So if you are not focused on one certain playing style, but you're all the time mixing things up, you become more like it's a little bit specialist against generalist. Nowadays, when you're focused on a strong identity, a strong game model, you're becoming a very specialist team. And Real Madrid is a very generalist team. And we know this from all sorts of competitions, that sometimes in certain circumstances, specialists are winning, and in other circumstances, generalists are winning. So both are viable. Both can be good.
Perhaps we can end with a quote, or thinking about a quote from I suppose one of the great thinkers of identity or psychology of identity would be Carl Jung. And this is a psychologist. He worked with Sigmund Freud. I'm sure most people will be familiar with him. They broke up because of differences in their interpretations. This is Jung. My aim is to bring about a psychic state in which my patient begins to experiment with their own nature, a state of fluidity, change, and growth, in which there is no longer anything eternally fixed and hopelessly petrified. And I think that's touching on some of the aspects we've been talking about. This, and not to get into this, we're going to wrap up Jung's idea. There are archetypes. Everyone's personalities, everyone's identities is inhabited by many different aspects, by many different sub-identities, by many different characters. And perhaps now we're entering this phase of football where the ability to integrate all these different aspects of the nature of the identity and almost show different faces in different moments is going to be something that we're going to see more and more. I think you're right. I think we'll always see the specialization and the focusing in on the very, very narrow aspects of identity and clearly formed, because there's advantages to that. We've discussed that. But I think that over the last, decades, we've heavily emphasized that. And that's been really the center of football coaching theory, or at the heart of so much, as Rangnick would describe. So perhaps now we enter a new, instead of having this unipolar idea, we go into a multipolar mode, a multiplicity mode, where we have this wide variety and range, which we can almost pick and choose, regardless, in relation to the what is required in the dynamics of the situation, and the how we think about fluidity is gonna radically change. I want to thank you, Martin, for this conversation and for going down these strange pathways we have been. I mean, we're talking about dystopia, we're talking about radical visions of the future. Who knows what's going to happen? But this is what you get here in the Third Circle.
Well, you know what they say about Thomas Müller all the time, that he's making unconventional runs or unconventional movements, and I always heavily disagree with that. And I say, like, he's making very good runs. Others are just not able to get runs from the same quality. The only reason why it's unconventional is that others are worse than Thomas Müller.
It's only unconventional in comparison to what we think of as normal. Until next time, thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.